Well, good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, depending on where you're tuning in from. I'd like to welcome you to the Masterclass webinar on sustainable sports events brought to you by Global Sports and the International Academy of Sports Science and Technology. My name is Mark Thomas, and I'll be moderating the session this evening. And we have three excellent speakers who are Emmanuel Husson, the Sports Equipment Manager at Paris 2024, Rika Rakic, the Head of Sustainability for the International Biathlon Union, and Helen Riley, the Arrivals and Departures Manager for Special Olympics World Games Berlin 2023. The first part of the session will be a panel discussion, but towards the end, we'll do our best to answer any questions any of you guys out there have. So if you have any questions that come to mind during the webinar, please pop them in the Q&A function, and we will do our best to get to them later. So without further ado, I'd like to give each speaker the opportunity to introduce themselves and also try and define how they see sustainability from a sports event perspective. Helen, would you like to kick us off?
Yes, I would. Hi, everyone. My name's Helen Riley, and as Mark rightly said, I am the Arrivals and Departures Manager for the Special Olympic Games here in Berlin being held this summer. I'm fairly new to the events industry. I only started last year for the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham, near to my hometown of Shrewsbury. And then I went to Qatar and worked at the World Cup for a company called TMS. So my background is actually transportation logistics. So very, very long time ago, I passed my Class 1 lorry driving license, and I've driven all over Europe. And then I decided to go into management within the haulage industry and worked my way up to being a transport manager, but fell out of love with that industry and decided to go on the events world, which has been an absolute eye-opener, and I absolutely love it. So Mark's question about defining sustainability. So for me, sustainability in major events is defined by how well we design, organize and produce an event, taking into account the local communities, the suppliers that we use and how we affect the local environment, and making sure that as an organizing committee, we're responsible to help inspire behavioural changes in all that are involved.
Well, that's fantastic. And I'd like to put the same point to Rika, if that's possible.
Yes, good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be part of this webinar. So my name is Rika Rakic, and I am representing the International Biathlon Union as the head of sustainability at that organization. I've done a rather long career in winter sports, but I also think I probably learned to ski before I learned to speak properly. So it's just a fitting thing that I'm working in the industry. And I have to, at this moment, also thank the organizer of this, the second organizer of this webinar, the AISTS, for a great start into the sports management business, which I've been able to pursue since I went to the program in Lausanne. So in terms of what sustainability means for the sport of biathlon, we actually took our time to define what that means, because it's not one top term that is meaning the same thing for most people around the world. It actually has rather different meanings. But for us, it's definitely boils down to making sure that we do our best, both from an economic, social and environmental perspective, make sure that the future generations also have the chance to enjoy the snow and playing in the snow. And what we do then, obviously, in events is to make sure that we try to minimize our environmental impact and maximize our positive social impact through the events.
Excellent. And because you're involved in winter sports, Rika, that's very close to obviously some of the issues that we're seeing in the environment in terms of, you know, global warming. Do you see that affecting your events directly as you go through the calendar for the year?
Well, I would have to say yes, it's definitely impacting our sport. At the World Cup level, World Championships level, the impact is less because those events tend to be well resourced. At the lower levels of competition and also at grassroots levels, we definitely see the impact because access to snow is becoming more difficult. It's shorter periods of snowy days. It's warmer, it's unpredictable. And indeed, we recently conducted a study among our athletes, and they too see the impact already within their very own eyes, and they are very worried about the future generation having the same opportunities to get into sport like they did.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And Emmanuel, finally, last but definitely not least, would you give us an introduction to yourself and again try and define what sustainability is from your event perspective?
Yeah, of course. Good evening, everyone. So as Mark mentioned, I'm the sport equipment manager at Paris 2024. So meaning that I'm in charge of the procurement of all sport equipment for the event. Actually, we are now 6 in the team to procure all the equipment. Previously, I worked at the national level at the French Federation of Squash and Cycling. I was in charge of organizing BMX racing events at the national levels. And I also worked in the public sector, more specifically at AFNOR, which is a French standardization body, where I was in charge of draft some technical and safety standards for sport equipment. Regarding sustainability from my perspective, I would say that it's an event that limits as much as possible the human footprint on the ecosystems where the event takes place. And I would add that it has to ensure social achievements and fair economic development practices at the local levels.
Yeah, thanks very much. And Emmanuel, in terms of actual, what are the important areas an event like something as big as Paris 2024 needs to focus on? Are there sort of key areas of sustainability that you sort of highlight and try to focus on?
Yes, actually, we have an overall political for sustainability, and we have 4 key areas actually. The first is we would aim at decreasing carbon footprint, meaning, for instance, that we are using a lot of existing facilities at a maximum. We aimed at encouraging low emission products by purchasing at the local levels. We aimed at compensating greenhouse gas emissions, for instance, by planting trees. So that the first key area is neutral carbon neutrality. I would say that the second is preserving biodiversity. The third one is applying circular economy, and I would take some example maybe later on that aspect as I'm in charge of the procurement for sport equipment. And finally, I would say that we have to increase the resilience as well by adapting the climate change and combating the diverse pollutions.
I mean, just an open question, man. I mean, obviously, the organization must be absolutely massive in in a operation like Paris 2024. I mean, how do you come to terms with trying to align all those different areas across such a large organization?
If I take my scope, I would say we have to ensure in our tender to reach our goals. So we have a lot of requirements to put in the tenders, and then during the analysis of every candidates, we have to make sure that our targets are in line with and the targets and the candidates and the offers are in line with our overall strategy. So yes, it's a very long process, very hard sometimes because we have to fulfill our requirements. But yes, we have to anticipate as much as possible all these key areas in our tenders, actually.
Absolutely. Rika, from an international federation perspective, I mean, how does the biathlon union basically focus on what particular areas around sustainability that makes up your overall strategy?
Yeah, overall we have 5 areas, and of course, as a snow sport, the climate area is very important for us. It's we need snow to be able to conduct our events, so that's why we put such priority on climate. But we equally see that our events are the main contributor to the carbon footprint of our sport. So we've been working very directly with our event organizers. They all are now reporting on their carbon footprints, contractually based already for the second season. We also see our sport itself having some very specific topics that related to floor, or we obviously use bullets in our rifles, so we have the issue of lead. We also have social topics that we address under our people focus area, and then finally we have what we call communications and awareness, and that actually is cross-cutting. It's something we have to do every day, everywhere, with every stakeholder all the time.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah. Yeah, one of the things that often is highlighted as the biggest impact around sports events is travel and logistics. And I'd like to maybe put a question to our resident logistics expert, Helen. In terms of logistics, how do you sort of try and minimize sort of carbon impact and build a strategy that can be truly sustainable? Because when you're moving people and stuff around the world, it's going to basically, have an impact no matter what you do. Yeah.
Yeah. So the events that I've worked on so far have taken this very seriously in the way how we transport people and the supply chain logistics, and how that is now changing, and it's becoming a legacy for future events. So what we're doing now will be taken to future events, and then it will be expanded on, etc. So for Birmingham, for the Commonwealth Games, the transportation of spectators, and I think this goes for all games, is a huge piece. So with Birmingham, we encourage them to walk, and that meant that we then produced maps that were accessed online, so it was easy access. There's no printing involved, and they could use the online app for the Commonwealth Games, and they were able to get walking maps, so they could walk from where they got off public transportation to their venues. They were encouraged to use all public transportation, because if they had a games ticket, it was free. So that was trains, trams, buses within the West Midlands area. And Transport for West Midlands were very keen to highlight this. We also encouraged them to use e-scooters and e-bikes. So then again, not bringing cars into Birmingham, and to use their own cycles or the e-bikes and scooters. And there were special areas that they could leave them outside the stadiums and the events, where they could park them and they weren't in the way of other people. Another area that is is the fleet cars. So they reduced the amount of fleet cars that we had, and the people who would usually use the fleet service were encouraged to use public transport where they could. But we also started using electric cars, hydrogen, the plug-in hybrids. So changing the way that the fleet system works, and it's the same here within the World Games. Toyota are currently partner with us, and we've got 90 electric cars, and the rest are all hybrids. So it's something that everyone is going down the road, and we've probably reduced the amount of cars that we're using as well. Where emissions couldn't be reduced within the Commonwealth Games, for the offsetting, they planted 2,022 acres of trees, which became the Commonwealth Forest within the West Midlands area. And then they used other ways to offset the carbon footprint that was created by the transportation system. As far as the logistics for Birmingham, we asked our suppliers that they had to adhere to our sustainable sourcing code. So all those suppliers, and we set clear guidance about our minimum environmental and social that we had minimum standards, and they had to adhere to those standards. So we asked suppliers to optimize their transportation by reducing fuel consumption and to measure their carbon footprint. And they were urged to consider switching to less polluting energy and to measure and minimize greenhouse gases related to their energy provision. So we set the standard, and those suppliers had to reach that standard for Birmingham. As for the Special Olympics, our logistics sustainability is vetted through the same as Emmanuel said. We do it through the tender system. So they have to have a minimum amount when they come to the tender system, and they have to have a sustainability policy. And we just make sure that all our warehousing, etc., we use environmentally friendly materials, and that we recycle, and what we can't recycle, we produce very little waste. So that's the way that we're working at the moment within the Special Olympics.
You know, listening to you there, Helen, I think you really get an appreciation of just how big a task it is and how holistic it is across an operation, and you know what efforts a major event needs to take to pull that together. Yeah, you know, taking a step further, Emmanuel, when you look at Paris 23, which is probably a step up in terms of size of participation, athletes and fans and everything else. I mean, are there any special things that Paris are doing to, try and, reduce the impact of logistics and other activities around the event?
I would say regarding the athletes and the visitors, I couldn't reply because I'm not in charge of this specific area, but I can give you an example regarding the sport equipment and goods. For instance, regarding two similar offers in terms of financial balance and specifications, we would encourage the local suppliers, meaning the ones where the production is less far than others in terms of transportation. We also encourage to transport goods by trains instead of trucks or planes and so on. So we have some examples like this for sport equipment. And in terms of using some big sport equipment, for instance, like boats for the officials, we encourage to use electrical and hydrogen propulsion systems instead of classical engine.
Yeah, so much to it. And when you get to the nitty-gritty, it's more than one department or one part of the organization. It has to be a complete alignment to achieve that. Rika, in terms of yourself at the Biathlon Union, I mean, do you have any issues? I was reading a report last year, I think called Sport for Nature, that basically sort of laid out, listen, if you really want sustainable events, sooner or later we're going to have less events and have less people taking part if we really want sustainable thing. Do you, as an international federation, do you see that as the only way forward, or can you sort of see a future where you can grow the size events and see sustainability coming through?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question, and it is a challenge because we've seen during the COVID years, this is actually the first season that we have again the opportunity to invite spectators to all our events. This season we had 2 seasons where we had even one season with no spectators, last season with just limited numbers. And of course it's a very different sport event when you don't have spectators. It's different for us as the event organizer, it's different for the athletes. So I think the challenge is that we love to invite our fans to be there to cheer the athletes on and create that special experience, but we'd like them to not travel so far to come to our events. And we've been investigating this. We've been conducting surveys. My challenge is the one that I have a minimum of 10 countries, even in World Cup alone, every season. So I need to consider different circumstances. Every organizer has different opportunities to offer the option for public transportation, for example. They are different distances to a major hub of public transportation. In some cases, the only way to actually travel is to drive your own vehicle into the venue pretty much. So that creates us this challenge that we know that 2/3 of our spectators tend to drive to our events, and they travel even over 200 kilometers one way to come. So what that creates is a big challenge. How do we change their travel behavior? How do we get them to that at that point that they decide how are they going to travel to the event? And can we actually convince them to choose a different alternative method to transport? And sometimes they don't have an option. And so maybe the challenge is for us then to see if we can create those options for them. We had World Championships in Germany this February, and it was included in the entry tickets to you could take the train from within a radius of 50 kilometers from the location. And even those who decided to drive, they could only drive approximately 10 kilometers from the venue, and then they had to it was mandatory to take a park and ride opportunity, that a shuttle for free that was provided. So it was almost like it was a bit of a compromise, but I think it was a very good effort, and we are now in the process of trying to figure out, okay, what was the impact of that? What was the impact really black and white in terms of the emissions that we saved by allowing them this option for the last mile or last 10 kilometers in this case as a minimum. So I think this is a dilemma. I'd love to hear what others will do, but I think we are struggling right now to find the perfect solution for this challenge.
Yeah, it's one of those situations, and if we really maybe want to look at a world for true sustainability, maybe there comes a simple question that sometimes less is more, and can we accept that as sports folks? Yeah, it's interesting from discussion so far. We've talked a lot about what I suppose organizations can control in terms of their own operation and their own people and activities. But Helen, when we reach out and think of, how the supply chain that, needs to support a major sports event comes into play, how do we try and verify or audit sustainability in a greater supply chain from whatever it is here? Because I can imagine that goes well beyond just the event itself and the organization itself.
I think it's very difficult because you have to take your supplier's word for it. It's not so bad with the bigger suppliers, as in Coca-Cola, because everything's very transparent. And so you don't have that. But when you go to smaller suppliers or smaller companies that you need to transport your goods, and you have to use outside, especially for logistics, using outside haulage companies to transfer the equipment, etc. We were very lucky at Birmingham. We had Kuhn & Nagel, so they are a massive company. But if you wanted to go for smaller events, I think it's very hard for them to prove. They have to take the company's word for it. So, people may say they sign up for these sustainability projects, but how do we audit a company that doesn't have any transparency to be able for them to prove to us that they are keeping to that? And I suppose the easiest way is to look at, how new their trucks are or how new they're because most trucks now are eco. Truck manufacturers now are making eco-friendly trucks that are they use less fuel, especially with AdBlue, etc. So I suppose that's one thing. You wouldn't use a company that are still using trucks that are 20 years old, because that then they've got no consideration for the environment because their trucks are so old. So you need to go with, and I think it's very hard now because companies want more money because sustainability costs so much money to be able to do that. So the trucks are more expensive, so they're going to charge you more. And of course, as we all know, organizing committees are very, very tight on budgets. So it's very, very difficult. I think we're in a very much unknown situation now for future games, of having the money and to be able to, we're hoping that it's mostly that we get sponsored more than anything by these companies, so we're not having to pay out for that that additional checks that we need to do. It is very difficult. Yeah,
very challenging. Yeah, and Emmanuel, from a Paris sort of 2024 perspective, I'm sort of presuming that within your tender process that you lay down certain, must-haves in terms of your suppliers and what they deliver. But how do you go about auditing and verifying that to make sure they back up what they're going to say?
I agree with Hélène. It's a very complex question and a tricky process. But actually, I would say that we are working on 3 leverage mainly. The first one is to communicate on our sustainable procurement strategy towards the suppliers or candidates prior to launching tenders. So we make a lot of communication on our requirements, and in parallel we did a big sourcing actually on different key players, responsible players, in order to better understand our economic environment for the sport equipment scope. So it was very, very useful to know better the different potential candidates. In addition, we put a specific clause in our contract regarding audit, allowing us to make some verifications on factories if needed. So it was very important to stabilize and to secure all our procurement process by these clauses. And I would add that we also include a clause very precise on the monitoring of the third parties by sending a specific questionnaire to our suppliers. So of course it's a declarative questionnaire, but it can allow us to verify a lot of things and to find if there is something not so transparent, not so clear. So yes, I would say that we have these 3 leverage, and at the end of the day, we can also go on site and to verify directly different things.
Yeah, and I'm sort of presuming because major games like the Olympics are pretty much publicly funded in fundamentals. There needs to be careful consideration of this, because if something sneaks out that is not right, that could actually not just be an issue in sustainability. It might be a political faux pas in terms of the organization of the event as a whole. So you have to tread the commercial and the operational idea, but also the political issues must be quite something you need to look at as well. Yeah, absolutely.
So that's why we are very careful about this process, and we know that we are monitoring on that topic, of course. But it's a good challenge. It's a very good challenge for us to better procure all our equipment and goods. So it's not just to be in line with some political issues or so on, but it's also yes to get aligned with our sustainable procurement strategy. So
yeah. I think it sort of leads me on to another subject, the sort of the sticky subject of the cost of sustainability, because when I've listened to you speakers talk about the organization and efforts you go through in these areas, that must instill a certain cost. And I've sort of become aware even of some quite eco-friendly properties such as Formula E. Sometimes when it comes to the crux of the matter, they will compromise their sustainability credentials for commercial interests. And I'll give an example. So in Formula E, they basically, with their calendar, didn't really align to a very efficient calendar, because certain places wanted to be certain times in the year, which meant they were going all around the world instead of actually managing a better logistics flow. Rika, maybe I can put it to you. How do you come to terms with that compromise between the cost of what sustainability is and, I suppose, the commercial side of the business, which is obviously important to any sports rights holders' bottom line?
Well, it definitely is a challenge because the belief is most times that sustainability is expensive, right? It's the extra thing that you have to do, and indeed actually would be someone else's job anyway to take care of it. I just tend to counter that by saying that I think we need to get creative here. I think if we're only waiting until we are perfect with everything and we have the perfect resources, we will never get started. And I think I would also like to give the example of being looking for other resources, other opportunities. We've been very successful with one of our very long-term partners who comes from the heating and space, and a company called Wiesmann in Germany, and we've extended our partnership to more like a value in kind type of partnership, where they are also helping us in understanding where we can find energy efficiencies, which today actually will translate into savings at the bottom line, because energy prices have gone up so much, and we need to get the cost down. Also, we've been able to identify other sources of revenue. Just yesterday, we launched a project officially that is funded by the European Union. It's focused on becoming resource efficient in our snowmaking process, which is an extremely important process for us. So I would like to see a lot more creativity and thinking outside the box in terms of finding solutions that are more sustainable, rather than saying, no, it's all going to cost too much.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. And I think it's one of the things in terms of the the pressure that events face, and quite often with an organization you've got to make difficult decisions. So again, sometimes you need to make a decision where you say, listen, we're going to make less money commercially for the sake of sustainability, and I think that's a very difficult question to manage for a lot of people. So we've got a few questions coming from the audience. So I'll start with Gio, who works for the UCI Cycling World Champs. He has asked, how would the panelists envision the major event field to act as a catalyst of inspiration and knowledge to help grassroots events on setting, achieving environmental sustainability goals for their own events? Okay, to be honest, I think that's almost like a legacy question with regards, what events can deliver from a grassroots sustainable perspective. So who wants to answer that one? Okay, Rika, I
can give it a go with some. I'll just give you an example. I don't have a perfect solution probably for you, but what I have seen is that we are sports people. Even the ones that organize the grassroots events, obviously they are sports people. They're extremely committed to what they're doing, and they love competing. And I've seen at least a couple of examples when you make them compete against each other, then that happens. And more recently, I saw a national competition series in Sweden. It was called Smart Energy Cup, very fittingly. And basically, they created a competition among the clubs that were participating in a national series. The club that was able to reduce their carbon footprint during one winter won, I think, the use of an electric van for the next season. So I think, I create some competition, and we're currently in the final phases of running a competition where we are looking for the most sustainable biathlon club around the world. And we're also having a competition there that now the fans are voting for the most sustainable story of a club. And we've got some great 3 candidates for clubs that actually have done a lot of work in terms of making their own operations, both for running their programs, but also organizing their competitions more sustainable.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And, another question coming through, and anyone can answer this if they want to. This is from, I'm struggling with the pronunciation, Jal Francelli. Apologies for my mispronunciation. Asks, do you guys have any or work with any third-party, organizations in terms of ESG specific software? So do you work with software in terms of how you manage, the whole question of ESG and maybe sustainability specifically? Maybe Emmanuel, do you have any thoughts on that?
I would say yes, because we have a sustainability department internally, and I know they are using some softwares, for instance, in order to calculate all the waste made by our products. So I'm not sure it's the software that we are talking about in the question, but we also have some softwares in order to to make valuation on our footprint, on our carbon neutrality, and on the waste we would have at the end of the game. So yes, for sure, but not necessarily for the third parties as mentioned in the question.
Okay. All right, we'll come back with the questions are coming thick and fast at the moment, but I'll get back to some of my questions at the moment, yeah. In terms of, a best of class event, and, Helen, you've worked on a few sort of major events. Which event would you sort of pinpoint as a sort of really best in class sports event in terms of sustainability? Do you have any one that really stands above the rest?
Well, people are going to be really shocked about this, and I think I'm probably going to go against the grain of everything that's been read in the media, but I have to say the World Cup in Qatar. It's the first time I've ever been to an Arab country, and I was quite shocked, to be fair. The sustainability part for transportation, I have to only go on transportation because that's who I work for. So I work for a company called TMS. And for the spectator movement, it was a huge piece, and it was achieved very, very well. So they actually had 900 electric buses, which they used, and they had charging stations all over Qatar that were used to charge the buses up. They also encouraged people to use the Doha Metro, which was actually specially built for the World Cup. To be fair, Doha was probably built for the World Cup. So they encouraged everybody to use the Doha Metro, which was immaculate, and I have to say it was a very, very well run. I worked on the spectator shuttle to go to Al Thamama Stadium, and the most people we put through was 17,000 people, and they all came by train. And then they got on buses and they drove a very short distance to get to the stadium. All 8 stadiums were within an hour. So there was no flights for teams to take, unlike what's going to happen when they go to the US, when the next World Cup is on. So there's going to be a lot of flights being used. There wasn't that in Qatar. The training grounds were very near to the stadiums and to where the actual teams were were in their accommodation. So they didn't have far to go to train. And in actual fact, the football teams actually quite liked it because they didn't have this big thing that they had to go. Didn't have a long distance to travel between their training grounds. The 5 of the stadiums were within walking distance. So you get off the train and you could walk to the stadium. So it eliminated using buses. And the closeness, as I said, the closeness of the stadiums, and also fans that were entering from other GCC countries, either Saudi or United or the UAE, had to leave their cars at the border, and then they were bussed in to save more cars coming into a very, Qatar is only the size of Yorkshire for us Brits. It's a very, very, very small country, and to have all that influx of cars, they just eliminated. They also encouraged their own people to work from home, to take the cars off the road when the World Cup buses were on. So for me, I think what they achieved was pretty remarkable. And to say that such a small country held, and it's probably one of the best World Cups that have been, and there was over 3 million people in that area. And it was very, very well organized, and their sustainability with they recycle water, they're in loose sale, they have underground trash compartments, so where you put your stuff in the bin, it goes underground and the vehicles go under there. It's all moved by conveyor belts. It's quite remarkable. So as an event, being it was only my second event that I'd ever done, my eyes were quite open, and it's such a clean city. It's you know, for me, I think we put a very good event on with the Commonwealth Games, but I think Qatar really did show that a very small country can host a very, very large event and keep it very minimal with the transportation.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because obviously we were so sort of caught up with the, you know, the human rights issues for workers or LGBT rights or whatever, that we sometimes maybe didn't get the I suppose the narrative in the West in terms of what positive things were coming out of the event. One question that Ellis McKinnon has asked with regards to some of the things that you may come into contact with, Helen, is you know, you talked about a lot of EV sort of transportation. You know, it could be buses, you know, it could be cars or e-bikes, etc. When it comes to the source of energy for recharging, is that something that's looked into? I mean, because, you know, I presume energy can come from coal-fired stations, or it could come from clean, renewable energy. I mean, is that something that's looked at in terms of the energy supply?
It was in Birmingham. I can't comment on Qatar because I wasn't involved in that at all. I was just involved in moving people on buses to the stadiums. But I know when with Birmingham, the charging stations were loaned to us by the National Grid. And other charging ports were installed, and they've actually stayed within Birmingham. So they didn't use generators. So it was supplied by the National Grid, and it was electric charging points. So we all use electric. So it's very difficult, isn't it? Everyone has electric in their house. So we have to find a way. I think in future, maybe the hydrogen way is the way that the cars will go, with future, you know, looking into the future, maybe electric. I know I had an electric car or a hybrid car, and the batteries to produce those batteries was actually more harmful than us driving probably petrol cars. So, but that is changing, and the way that they're being made and how they're being charged is changing. So we have to do it in small steps. And I think people look at sustainability that, oh, we want it now, or we need to make those changes now, but it isn't. It's a lot. It's going to take years to get for us to learn how to use the energy in a different way.
Yeah, very interesting. I was hoping all vehicles will be charged by nuclear fission and they'll be flying in a couple of years. That'd be ideal, but I think it's a long way to go for that, Chair. But I think, again, it's about that whole supply chain, and energy supply is obviously a key part of that. And we talk about electric vehicles, but we quite often don't talk very much of that supply. A question that's come in for you, Emmanuel, from Thomas de Villiers. He asks, what sort of green technology specific innovations are going to be implemented for Paris 24? Are there any sort of very sort of unique things that Paris are trying to put into place?
Actually, it's quite confidential, and it's not very original. But I could say that we are thinking about new technology as hydrogen, as I mentioned previously, and electrical. But for sure, regarding the recharging stations, it's a critical issue, because we have to deal with cities. We have to take into account the overcosted solutions, and that's why it's a real challenge and a big balance to have. But for sure, we are aiming to try new things, especially for sport equipment and for boats. Yes, for the boats, for the official boats. But it's quite long, because for this kind of equipment, it's not necessarily mature, and we make some sourcing before on the specific events on sailing, for instance, and we were surprised that we discovered that all the boats for the official were thermic ones, and I would have thought that today we could use electrical boats, but it's not the case at all, for instance. So yes, it depends on the market, of course, if the market is mature enough or not, and it's also a matter of cost. But regarding your previous questions on the cost of sustainability, at Paris 2024, we aimed at, of course, reducing costs and to reach sustainability, which is on the paper quite sometimes paradoxal, but not so far, because for instance, we are using a lot of existing equipment, and we have a lot of equipment on the venues already. So we reduced our footprint due to this first option. The second one is reducing all the quantities compared to the previous games. So sometimes maybe we had the habit to have a lot of spares, or yes, to use a lot of sport equipment not necessarily needed. So we made a great work in order to refine and to reduce all the quantities. The third option is to encourage rental instead of purchasing, in order to limit again the footprint and the reuse after the games. And the last thing is when we have to purchase and to keep some equipment, the idea is to reuse as a legacy program for the communities, for the sport movement, and so on.
Yeah, very interesting.
To use the existing ones.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Just going back to Helen's point about Qatar, I got a great comment in from Imam Galal, who sort of said, you know, FIFA even asks all the workers to sort of return their uniforms and clothes so they could use them at the FIFA Women's World Cup. So I suppose that sort of reusable side of what people are doing in terms of sustainability is very important. I'm now officially overloaded with questions online, and I'll try to get them in a minute, but there's one topic I wanted to cover, and maybe Rika, you can give me your thoughts on this in terms of from your perspective, how would you ensure post-event legacy in terms of sustainability? Because it's all very well doing it in the here and now, but I think legacy is very much a key word in terms of how any event leaves a mark for, you know, future generations.
Yes, I think that's a key already in the very beginning of someone deciding to apply for an event. That it should not be just having an event for the sake of having an event. There should be a plan, a legacy plan, that is kind of the driving force. From our perspective as an international federation, of course, we'd like to connect the event to a plan to grow the sport in that country. It's something that has to kind of be planned in advance, and it has to run in advance of the event. Of course, ideally, it is supported by success of that country's national team at the event. But in terms of venues, I think we've discussed here events that end up creating a lot of new infrastructure, and we'd like to see events, of course, that are able to reuse infrastructure and not build new infrastructure. But if something is built, of course, the infrastructure, there needs to be a legacy use plan for that post event. That's a very key, and that's where it comes to actually then having the basis for recreational sport, for growing youth sport, growing participation on a national level. So to me, those are definitely two sides of the same coin, and we try to really not only request any day anymore, we are imposing almost as thinking into our bidding process. So nowadays, when the next bids are going to come in for the 28, 29 events for us, there's definitely a section that speaks to what are your plans for the event legacy and the sustainability of the organization.
Yeah, it's very true. And again, I mean, you know, the true legacy of any event can only be seen, you know, 5, 10, 20 years in the future. And it's something, for example, when I look at London 2012, you know, it's still an ongoing process. So, you know, it never really stops if you really want to manage it properly. Yeah. I got a good question in from Callan Davis from the ICC, who's sort of basically sort of saying, you know, most of what we talked about tonight is about, you know, events in more mature, developed countries. You know, and really sort of asking what are the important initiatives or approaches to sort of, you know, approach sustainability maybe in more underdeveloped countries. Now, I'm going to open this up for anyone to answer, or I'm going to point a finger at someone. So Rika, Helen, or Emmanuel, do you want to take this one up? Any volunteers?
I think Helen wants to volunteer.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay,
This
you're
is
up.
probably yeah, thank you. This has to be a personal view, because I haven't been in this industry to know much about how, but I really feel for the smaller countries, because I don't think they will have the money or the infrastructure, unfortunately, to host big major multi-sport events, and I think that is something else that the bigger organizations are going to have to look at, is that it's a bit like a cheese board, that maybe everyone should be getting a slice, because it's very difficult, I think, it's the same countries that are hosting the bigger events. Britain's had its time, so we started in London 2012. They then had quite a lot of major events, and it's now finished with the Commonwealth Games, and now it's moved to Australia. So Australia have got the next Commonwealth Games. They've also got the Olympic Games, and America are the same. So they've got the World Cup, and then they've got LA 28. So it sort of goes in cycles. I think we'll see more going to countries in the GCC, because they have got the money. But unfortunately, I think a lot of the smaller countries, it's very hard for them to, because they haven't got the money to put that infrastructure in, which is what the bigger organizations want. They want to be shown that they can build these massive stadiums, and maybe some idea in the future would be that we have a central Olympic park, that countries host it, it's in one static place, and maybe a few countries can join together and they host. I don't know how the future of, but there has to be something done, because the amount of air travel that we do to get to these events. It's, I suppose, for a sustainability thing, we have to look at how we go forward and look at ways of involving smaller countries, whether they group together and hold something. But I think they do get left out. Yeah, sorry, that's just a personal view. That's nothing to.
Really good question. Yeah, it's a really good question. And I suppose, Rika, when you look at biathlon, I presume it's pretty much a first world, sport in most cases. Do you look at taking, your events to more developing countries in terms of your own, efforts to develop the sport?
Of course, in our case, we have two big requirements. One is we need a winter climate, we need snow. So unfortunately, that's not available in many parts of the world, or majority of the countries, I think. And then we also need a very specific type of venue with the shooting included in addition to cross-country skiing. But yes, we definitely, we just had the Junior World Championships for the first time ever in Kazakhstan, which was a new country for us. Obviously, it's a very traditional winter country, but that limits a little bit the expansion that we can foresee for our main Olympic event. At the same time, we are also developing a dryland or roller skiing version of our sport that uses laser rifles. So we definitely look to grow our sport, but it will probably be a little different format. And those are opportunities that we'd like to offer to countries that don't have snow naturally, but still would like to get involved in the endurance sport of biathlon that has the exciting element of shooting.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, I'm going to switch companies. I've got quite a few questions from people, not questions, maybe a theme. Obviously, people are interested in working in sustainability, and I think Pierre Antoine and Lakita and a couple of others have sort of meant what job opportunities are out there in terms of sustainability events. I mean, whether that be full-time, part-time, volunteer. Maybe Manuel, you can have a crack at that first, yeah?
Yes. at Paris 2024, as I said previously, we have a sustainability department in charge of that topic. And for instance, we have some positions related to the carbon neutrality. So clearly, basically, it means that we have to we have to see on different topics in different areas. For instance, for sport equipment, the footprint based on that goods. So basically, we calculate all the waste provided by the goods, and the goal is to reduce, of course, the waste and to see how we could reuse a lot, most of them. And so we have some people, in charge of calculating the footprint, others in charge of to find solutions in terms of wasting. And so yes, we have a lot of different roles, but I'm not in charge specifically on that matter, but I know that it's very important in our organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And Helen, any jobs available in Berlin for the Special Olympics? I got my resume ready.
No, unfortunately, everything is closed now. We are only 4 months away from the games. We did do a volunteering campaign, and we've had about 20,000 volunteers. I think a lot of people don't know a lot about the Special Olympics, so if it's okay, I will just say a bit, because I think it's something people don't hear about. So the Special Olympic World Games was started by the Shrivers family back in 1968, I think it was. The Kennedys, one of the Kennedys' sister was ID, which is they have a my brain has now just gone blank. It's oh, I'm trying to think what they call. We call it ID. So it's where we have, my head is gone. So it's for people with special needs. And so we hold a World Games. They have a national games every year. Athletes come from all over the world. We have got nearly 7,000 athletes coming for the World Games here in Berlin. And it's same as an Olympics. We have 26 sports, some of them are Olympic sports. It's recognized by the IOC. And we're looking forward to inviting them all to Berlin to compete over 9 days in 26 disciplines. Everyone gets a medal. So the person who becomes 8th is as happy as the person who is 1st. So we also do a thing called unified partners, which means we have mixed teams. So in basketball, we'll have people that have ID, and we'll have a unified partner. So if they decide to go the wrong way in the court, they can steer them to go the right way. So we're very excited, and we're looking forward to it.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah. Emmanuel, I've got another couple of questions which I'm going to put to you. Firstly, and I really don't know if you know about this, so forgive me for asking if you don't. The opening ceremony in Paris, and we've heard some spectacular stories. Are there any legacy components of that were left behind? And secondly, are there any real Olympic athletes, and this could be a personal thing in terms of, that are passionate about sustainability and, providing their own personal platform to sort of push forward that agenda?
For sure, opening ceremony is not in my scope at all. but I know that, as you can imagine, there are a lot of challenges to meet. So regarding the legacy part, I couldn't be able to answer, but I know that some of existing facilities and boats will be used, so it's also in line with our sustainable procurement and strategy, because we aimed at using existing products or equipment. And I'm sorry, can you repeat your second question, please?
There's more on, some of the athletes that may sort of take a really positive stance on sustainability. I mean, do you know any, French athletes or international athletes that may use the Paris 2024 Olympics as a platform to sort of promote that agenda?
Oh, very good question. To be frank, I don't know. I didn't see anything about it, so I couldn't reply.
Anyone else know? Rika, do you know any athletes that may be sort of putting the flag up for sustainability and fighting that agenda?
That are going to Paris 24. I'm not really sure I know, but I definitely know that more and more athletes are willing to speak up, and we like to see that as well, because we think that the sport has a great platform, and much more than an institution like an international governing body, the athletes can speak to their fans and be convincing about that kind of message. So I would really hope to see even more athletes speaking up, and we are definitely trying to do our part to encourage them to do so.
Okay, that's excellent, yeah. And just one question to you as well, which I've got in from Jose. He asked sort of, when you're sort of, putting your host city or host country bids together, how high on the agenda is sustainability in that choice?
Well, I can speak for us that it's increasingly important. I've seen the bidding processes from events that were awarded 2018 to now. The next events definitely will have a much greater importance put to sustainability and legacy considerations in the awarding of the event.
Yeah. Okay, guys, I mean, we've come to the end of it. I must say, and I apologize to Tamara and Yongjing Lee and a couple of other guys, Tang Lang and Tamara again, who've come up with questions. We're not going to get through them all. So if there's any other further things, I would say reach out to the panelists and see if you can connect with them. But I would just like to, say thank you to Helen, Rika, and Emmanuel for taking part tonight. I'd also like to again send our appreciation to Global Sports and International Academy of Sports Science and Technology for putting this whole thing together. It's been great. For me, time is so short that it's just flown by, and there's so more issues that we could have covered tonight, and certainly more questions that were coming through. But I hope it's sort of achieve what we're trying to do, get you thinking about different areas of what sustainability means to events, and then how we can take that forward in the future. So thank you to everyone, and especially thank you to all the participants that took part tonight. So thanks very much, and a very good evening, good morning, or good afternoon, wherever you are. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.